You.
So welcome everybody to our third in a series of presentations for elite athletes and parents. This one's titled Optimizing Nutrition for Training and Competition, and specifically what to eat before, during, and after practices and games. My name is Richard Bucciarelli. I'm here along with my friend and colleague and co-host Elisa Gracci, and we're gonna talk to you about literally what the title says, which is what athletes need to eat and drink before, during, and after every time they have a practice and a game. So maybe Elisa, if we can go to the next slide there. So this is it. We're going to start about the presentation talking about fueling peak performance and specifically regarding kind of the nutrition and what you get from food and from hydration. So let's go next. This is just an outline for what we'll talk about today. We're going to start by discussing carbohydrates, then we'll get into proteins. We're going to talk about hydration, which includes water and electrolytes, and you'll see exactly what I mean when I talk about all that. And then finally, just a little summary before I pass it on to Elisa. Okay, let's go next. So this is just a little bit about me. We'll go fast. I put former in parenthesis because in my head, I feel like I am still an athlete, but maybe the results don't bear that out anymore. I am a coach and a sports scientist, a PhD candidate looking to wrap up that after a long journey this year. I'm also a small business owner, and my business is speed training, and of course we've connected with Elisa and with USANA, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But that's it, not here to talk about myself. I am also a teacher and lecturer, and some of this content is taken directly from some of the courses that I already teach at the college and the university level. All right, so let's get started, and we're going to talk about carbohydrates. So if we can just put all the text up there. So what I'm going to say is anyone who's watching this live or later on the video, the way to think about anything to do with, whether it's nutrition or anything to do with a topic around science in general, is that really to understand science, because that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to look at data, we're going to look at evidence, we're going to look at research that's been published, and to understand it, one of the things that is really, really important is to think like a scientist. And so, what does that mean? Well, we have to think about what scientists do. And, what we do in science is we are presented with data. We either collect it, we observe it, we test, we conduct experiments, or we simply read data from other scientists. So we're presented with data, and then we need to interpret it. And that's where this question in red here comes in, which is, what does this mean? So I'm going to do that, to all of you that are watching, and I'll answer. But I want you to think in your head. If you do have questions, we'll keep questions to the end, just because of the format and everything that we're doing here. But that's the question whenever you're presented with data. So what does this mean? Because data on its own, without interpretation, doesn't really tell you the full story. You don't even know unless you've taken the time to think about it and interpret it, analyze it, and then the next step is even to appraise it and to start to give your own professional opinion about it too. So that's what we're going to do, and we'll start on the next slide. If we can say, here's just a simple question, which is, what are the energy requirements of athletes? And this is a nice little kind of an infographic that shows sort of the high end. So the Tour de France is really an interesting competition. It's probably, in terms of simply the load or the physical demands, the hardest sport in the world. And one of the reasons we know that is because the athletes that compete in that competition, they need to consume about 6,000 calories a day. That's literally twice as much as what even a lot of other athletes, as you can see, rowing, soccer, etc., will consume. So the energy requirements for athletes, it varies depending on the sport, but these are high numbers. These are in the thousands, 3, 4 plus thousand calories a day. And really, the question there, what is energy balance? Well, energy balance essentially means that you are consuming enough calories intake, right? You're consuming enough to match the demands or what you are using, because you have to take in energy and then use it. And if you don't, then you're at a negative balance if you haven't taken in enough energy. And on the other side of things, which is not as common in athletes, but certainly common in the general population, is you take in more energy than you consume, and that's a positive energy balance, and that's when you gain weight. So that's the idea. Again, we deal with a lot of team sports, so we're maybe in the range of 2,000 to 4,000 calories a day. It's a lot. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, and this is the first little what does it mean, and this is a good little graph that just shows the relationship between energy intake and energy expenditure. So if we just hit the slide one more, right, and we'll say what does it mean, right? Well, really, oh no, yeah, just there, yeah. So what does it mean? It means that as a general rule for athletes, the intake, right, what you eat, really has to closely match what you use, or the expenditure. And this is the Tour de France. This is the most physically demanding sport in the world. They're literally riding a bicycle through the mountains in France. And you can see that the two curves, the red is intake and the blue is expenditure. They're almost parallel. They almost line up, and in some cases they literally do line up with each other. So clearly, and then you could do the same thing for soccer, for basketball, for hockey, for any sport. You'd see that the intake has to match expenditure. At the top level, the athletes, they know this and they get this right, and that's one of the reasons why they can perform the way they do. So let's move on. Okay, so now we're going to just talk about the role of carbohydrates on the body. Well, simply put, carbohydrates are a primary source of energy. Blood glucose, this is simply the carbohydrate or the sugar that circulates through the blood. It's necessary to be maintained at a certain level. Muscle glycogen, when you hear that word, and we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight in this presentation, muscle glycogen, that's the stored energy that the muscles store, and it's used when needed. Okay, and keeping in mind also that excess carbohydrate that anyone consumes that they do not use as energy, then of course will get converted into fat. Okay, it is a protein sparer. So what that means is that if an athlete were ever to have a very low carbohydrate diet, then instead of carbohydrates, it's actually you see AA there. That's short for amino acids. And so if you don't have enough carbohydrate, then it's the amino acids that are actually used in order to make glucose or make energy. And that's not really a good thing, because that means that, in that case, an athlete would be breaking down their own muscle. So anyway, carbohydrate in the diet prevents that from happening. It's a metabolic primer, meaning that the actual metabolism of fat, carbohydrate is required for fat to be metabolized. So when we say metabolism, we're saying burning fat. So burning fat actually doesn't happen at the same rate if there isn't carbohydrate present. There's actually an energy cost to breaking down foods, and you need carbohydrate for that. And finally, we have essentially the fuel or the energy for the central nervous system, which is the brain and spinal cord. Glucose is the only possible source of energy for the brain. And that's another reason, in addition to all of these reasons, why carbohydrates are so important to have in the diet. So we move on now. Now we got to talk about sports, and of course, we're going to talk about my favorite sport, which is soccer, and we're even going to go one step further, which is that we're going to talk about the best soccer players in the world, which this study used, which are the Italians, right? This was done in Italy. So these are the best. Now, this particular study is a very, very interesting one, because it looked at muscle glycogen levels, okay? They took groups of soccer players right before a game, and they put those players into two groups. One group was given a normal diet, which has carbohydrate, but just at a normal level, perhaps something like 45 or 50% of the total calories came from carbohydrate in the normal diet. That's the black bar. And then the white bar was given a high carbohydrate diet. So that's upwards of 65% of the calories per day coming from carbohydrates. So we've got these two groups of soccer players. One had a normal diet, one had a high carbohydrate diet. And what you can notice is again, think of glycogen as energy. And right before the game, their energy levels were 100%, meaning that their energy was full. They had as much glycogen, as much energy as they possibly could. And, that's because they were well fed. After the game, right away, we can see what happened. Well, both groups lost over 50% of their muscle glycogen. And you can see it down there. And it was relatively even in terms of one or the other. So whether or not as long as you have a full level of muscle glycogen, your diet necessarily doesn't have that much of an effect right after the game. But then it starts to, when we look at the time intervals afterwards. So 18 hours is roughly 1 day after the game. Already, we can see that the group that had the high carbohydrate diet started to replenish their glycogen faster. So 1 day later, we've got one group that has, almost up to 70% of their energy or glycogen. And the other group is below 60, about 55. And then, 42 hours, which is roughly 2 days later, again, the same trend. Okay, the high carbohydrate group is already over 70, close to 80% replenished. And the normal diet is over 60. So now, maybe Elisa, just click it one more time, right? What does it mean? Well, first of all, okay, what it means is that a high carbohydrate diet will allow you to replenish your energy quicker than a normal carbohydrate diet. And remember, this did not look at a low carbohydrate diet. That's really not good for athletes, soccer or otherwise, because carbohydrate is, again, as we said, it's the only source of energy we can use for high intensity exercise like soccer. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. The second, which is very important to consider, is that 2 days after the game, even the high carbohydrate diet group was only, between 70 to 80, maybe 75% replenished. Now, why is that so important? It's because athletes don't just play a game and then do nothing until the next game. They have to train. They might take 1 day off after the game. Maybe they won't. Maybe they'll do recovery or something, but certainly 2 days after the game, they're going to have to train again. And that means that their energy again might be going down, going up, going down. So what it means is that more or less you can think of glycogen as energy, and you can think that energy you refuel, it goes up, and you train or play, it goes down. It almost follows like a wave-like pattern. And this is constant throughout a sport, throughout a competitive season. So it means that you don't just need a high carbohydrate diet after the game or 2 days after the game. You need it all the time. And the reason you need it all the time is because even with a high carbohydrate diet, you're not going to be at 100% energy level for very long. So that's what it means. So go to the next slide. So now we can start to look at some of the other interesting effects of carbohydrates. So Elisa, one more click, and what does it mean, right? What does this mean? Again, we're presented with data. We got to think like scientists. On the y-axis, you have urea, nitrogen measured in the sweat, okay? And on the x-axis, we have just, 3 conditions. One is just a resting condition. One is with a high carbohydrate diet, and one is with a low carbohydrate diet. Well, we can understand that. We can see that sweat urea, essentially, the idea there is that the more nitrogen in the sweat, what you find is that that's a sign that protein is breaking down. So if that level is high, then that means that the body is, again, like we said before, metabolizing or breaking down its own muscle, its own protein, in order to provide energy. And, where do we see this happening a lot? With a low carbohydrate diet. With a high carbohydrate diet, you get about 3 times less muscle protein breakdown. And that's important because athletes don't want to break down their own muscle. So not only does a high carbohydrate diet replenish energy much faster, it also spares protein. That's what it means. So we move on. So now we got to talk again about kind of the theme of this presentation, which is about what to do before, during, and after exercise. And we're going to start with before exercise. And maybe if you can go to the next slide, Elisa. So before exercise, there is this concept of carbohydrate loading. And I just want to, say as an aside that a lot of athletes don't necessarily need carbohydrate loading, but it can help. And this is an example of a protocol of how it's done. So you can see this and you can learn from it, but really, especially if you're playing in a team sport like soccer, like, you know, hockey, whatever, the key is mostly just to have a relatively high amount of carbohydrate all the time. You don't need to do this loading protocol, but this is just to show you what you can do, okay, and what is done a lot of times with high level athletes. So first stage is to deplete energy, which means you do hard exercise and you deplete your muscle glycogen, and then for the next 3 days, you have a low carbohydrate diet with only 100 grams per day. So you deplete your glycogen, and then for a few days after that, you don't put much back. So now you're at a low state, and it sounds a little funny to think of it that way, but really why that's done is that actually, that low carbohydrate in the body, that stimulates you know, a lot of the metabolic processes, so that when carbohydrate is then brought in, then the storage and the replenishment of muscle glycogen actually happens faster. So it's kind of an interesting strategy. In the second stage, right, which is the next 3 days, is a loading stage. You have a very high carbohydrate, 400 up to 700 grams a day. So this is, you know, on the high end of what any athlete can do. And so the idea is first you deplete, then you replenish to the maximum level, and then on the 8th day, Elisa, then we'll see what's that. That's a competition. And so this is kind of the idea that it can be done a week before a big competition. But just keep in mind, again, this is a protocol that's used really for more like the individual sport athlete competing in an Olympic qualifier or a world championship or something like that, where they don't have competitions all the time. It doesn't work as well with team sports, but we already saw that with team sports, what you really need is just a high amount of carbohydrate throughout. Okay, so let's move on. And let's say, okay, well, does it work? So to answer that question, we're going to look at the graph on the top first, which essentially is measuring muscle glycogen on the y-axis, okay, and the difference between the pre-carbohydrate loading and the post. And what we can see is, well, yes, if we're talking about adding muscle glycogen in athletes, well, absolutely, it works, because the amount of muscle glycogen here was doubled after the carbohydrate loading. And then the second graph on the bottom here, right? We can click the second one, yeah. So this is just, again, a simple measure, but looking at time to exhaustion. That's how long it takes before an athlete is exhausted, and the relationship between muscle glycogen levels when you start exercise, so initial muscle glycogen relative to time to exhaustion. What do we see, right? Elisa, we can click one, right? What does it mean? This one. Well, simply what it means is that the more glycogen you have, the more energy you have in your body when you start exercise, right? The greater the initial muscle glycogen, the greater the time to exhaustion, the longer it takes for an athlete to get exhausted. So if we're talking soccer, football, hockey, basketball, track and field, whatever, a greater time to exhaustion simply means it takes longer for you to get tired. So it's a very clear relationship. The answer, does carbohydrate loading work? Absolutely it does. Okay, so let's move on. So now we're talking about summary about what athletes need before training and competition. So the meal before training and competition has to provide sufficient fluid, and we're going to talk about fluid in a few minutes here, okay? It needs to be relatively low in fat and low in fiber. Why? Because fat and fiber tend to cause a little bit of gastric distress, maybe, you know, not stomach cramps necessarily, but a little more, you know, gas and things like that. So low in fat, low in fiber, high in carbohydrate to maximize the maintenance of blood glucose and the storage of muscle glycogen, moderate in protein. Too much protein, again, also can tend to sit on the stomach. It takes longer to break down, and also needs to be familiar and well tolerated. And I know that Elisa will have probably some excellent points, you know, to touch on with that concept. It sounds simple, but you know, it's quite often that you know, athletes will make a mistake of trying something new before a game or a training session, and it's not well tolerated. This is a simple guideline here at the bottom: 200 to 300 grams of carbohydrate in a meal 3 to 4 hours before exercise, or you know, again, you can match or normalize it to body weight: 3 to 5 grams of carbohydrate for every kilogram of body weight. So that's before training and competition. So let's move on now. and we're going to talk about an interesting concept, which is eating during training and competition. And sounds a little strange. You know, you're not going to sit down and have a plate of pasta necessarily in the middle of a game, but there are things that you can do. So a snack or a beverage needs to replenish fluid. There's water that's lost. Okay, electrolytes as well, which we'll talk about. You need carbohydrate in order to maintain blood glucose. And if it's done appropriately, you see that word exogenous, that simply means, you know, carbohydrate taken in, you know, from a food source. It can delay fatigue and it can improve performance. So it does those two things. You get less tired, or fatigue is prolonged, and it can improve performance. Not all athletes require carbohydrates during exercise, and we're going to give some guidelines so that you know as an athlete when you would need it and when you would not. So you don't need it all the time. Okay, so if we move on, now we'll talk about, you know, what happens when you consume carbohydrate during exercise. So the first one here, this is looking at plasma glucose, blood glucose, relative to time, and they had a few conditions here, okay, where they fed, or in one of them anyway. Here we can see kind of the, you know, the bar with the, I believe this is the diamond shape here. Okay, what happened to blood glucose when they fed these athletes here with carbohydrate during exercise? Well, they got a nice spike in blood glucose. And if you think about, you know, when blood glucose is going down while you're exercising, it's not a good thing, because essentially what that means is that eventually, you know, your energy levels are going to go too low to the point where you're going to have to slow down or stop. So if you can cause a bit of a spike in blood glucose, then, you know, that spike doesn't stay there, but the blood glucose is maintained, or it decreases at a lower rate. And I'm going to use a word, and actually, while I use that word, I'm actually also going to, oh, here we are. Yeah. No. Okay, I was going to draw on the screen, but that's okay. What I'll do is I'll just simply explain it, that you can see, you know, with my cursor here, that the even the group that had the carbohydrate, you know, the blood glucose raised and then it dropped off, but it didn't drop off at the same rate. It didn't go as low as in the control group. And the idea with this feeding of carbohydrate is you attenuate, or you slow down the decrease in blood glucose. So it doesn't mean you get all the energy back right away. That's not possible. But you slow down the decrease so that you can still maintain a high work output. So the next graph, right? The next one. This is just simply looking at carbohydrate oxidation relative to carbohydrate ingestion. So it's the relationship between eating carbohydrate during exercise and burning carbohydrate during exercise. And if I had to ask you, what does it mean? Well, the idea is very clear, that the more you take in during exercise, the more you burn. And, you know, that's kind of an idea that we'll talk about which athletes need it and when, so we're clear. But if you are, you know, exercising over a long period of time at high intensity and you're going to take in carbohydrate, then it can help you, you know, to burn more and delay fatigue. And then finally, the last graph, this is kind of a real simple one, but an interesting one, where they just had two groups performing hard cycling exercise. One group, which is the yellow bar, was given carbohydrate 135 minutes. So this is, and we got to keep this in mind, that's more than 2 hours of a hard cycling workout. That group was given the carbohydrate, the other in the green wasn't. What happened to the group in the green? Well, remember we talked about that blood glucose, right? Energy going down. It just went down, 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 down. And that affects performance negatively. They get tired, as opposed to the group which got the carbohydrate. And again, what happened? We saw it down here. You can see it up here again. You get a spike in blood glucose. And then finally, you get this maintenance, or at least an attenuation of the decrease. Their energy level stayed more consistent, and you know that their performance would have stayed more consistent too. So does it work, right? Elisa, what does it mean? It means yes, absolutely. Consuming carbohydrate during exercise does work. But this is the summary of the guidelines. You only need it when these conditions are present. Here's what they are. Endurance events, cycling, running, skiing, right? Cross-country skiing, greater than 2 hours, including soccer games. Why do I say soccer? First of all, if you play 90 minutes, that's an hour and a half, plus a 30-minute warm-up. now you're at 2 hours, and then, we all know there's extra time and everything. So soccer, yeah, it's absolutely helpful during soccer and many other endurance events, but they have to be the ones that are longer. You don't necessarily need it for a 10, 20, 30-minute workout. Okay, next is intense continuous exercise lasting about 1 hour. That's when the intensity is high. Why? Because when the intensity is high for any type of exercise, you're using almost exclusively carbohydrates, and you may need to supplement with a little bit. Extreme conditions, heat and altitude, you tend to use more muscle glycogen in those conditions. Also, and this is important to keep in mind, if the athlete has not consumed adequate energy, if you think back to the very first graph that we looked at, the study on the Italian soccer players, right? They started with 100% energy level. They were well fed. Not everybody is. And even they, by the second day, were not fully replenished. So that's sometimes when the supplementation can also help. And one more point there, right? Okay, which is that fat and protein, they delay gastric emptying, meaning they sit in the stomach longer. They are not recommended to eat during exercise. Really, never. You don't eat fat at halftime. You don't eat protein at halftime. And by the way, I should have mentioned, if it's a soccer, basketball, whatever it is, halftime is an excellent way to take in the carbohydrate if you need to. And we know that USANA has some excellent options for that, which we'll talk about. Okay, so we move on to after exercise, after training and competition. This is what you need. Again, you need fluid, you need electrolytes, and you need carbohydrates. Okay? You also need protein, which has amino acids to build and repair muscle. And we will speak specifically about protein in a few minutes. But that's what you need. And of course, carbohydrate is there, and you need carbohydrate after. Why? To replenish, to put back the energy that you lost. So if we can go to the next slide, and we can see right. So the next slide now essentially is looking at our second topic, right, which is protein. So when we talk about protein, we can then look at the first kind of key question about protein, which is how much protein do athletes need? And that's a tough one to answer, but the best source of information we have is the Canadian government guidelines, RDA. You're going to see that acronym typically. We're talking that's recommended daily allowance or recommended dietary allowance. So this is it, first of all, and let's keep those four on the screen for now, Elisa. Just the first four, yeah, first four, yeah, one more, yeah, okay. So this is interesting because what we have is we have sedentary men and sedentary women, and then we have recreationally active men and women. And sedentary essentially means, if you're a sedentary person, it means you're not moving. You're sitting down at work. You're not getting exercise. And recreationally active, well, okay, that might mean maybe some type of exercise at the recreational level, sports, going for walks, that kind of thing. But the protein requirements are actually the same for men and women. And the reason they're the same for men and women is because they're normalized to body weight. So even if men may be heavier or whatever, they have the same amount relative to their body weight. And they're the same for sedentary versus recreationally active men and women. And that's interesting, maybe a little surprising, but the idea there is that recreational activity doesn't really place enough of a load on the muscles in order to necessitate or require more protein. You don't use your muscles that much when you're recreationally active. You still do, but you don't need more protein than 0.8 grams per kilogram per day. Now we have some of the categories where you need more. One, Elisa, if we can go there, is pregnant and lactating women. Why do they need more? Because they will be producing milk for the baby, and also, of course, being pregnant means there is a baby growing inside, which has its own energy requirements. Of course, not as much as a full-grown human, but there are more. So they need more, okay, 1.1 to 1.3. And finally, now we have active athletes, and these two categories, which are endurance trained and then strength trained is the next one. And what do you notice here? Well, there's a minimum of 1.2 grams per kilogram per day for both groups, but the strength trained group has a bit of a higher, top end, up to 1.7 grams per kilogram per day, versus endurance train, which are 1.4. And the basic idea there is that one of the reasons to have or to need more protein, but one of the reasons that athletes need more protein is if they're getting more muscle damage or muscle protein breakdown. And I like to explain muscle damage or protein breakdown. Not, you don't want to think of that as an injury. That's not what muscle damage in that case is, or protein breakdown. Essentially, you can think of the soreness that an athlete will feel after a game, after a hard training session, and it may last a day or 2 days or whatever outside of the presence of an injury. That soreness is literally caused from small damage to the muscle fibers, and that damage can only be repaired by consuming protein. So the strength trained athletes, the ones that are either lifting weights or and again, we can keep in mind soccer, hockey, football, these are contact sports. There's a lot of deceleration, basketball, all of them. Okay. And those athletes do need to train with resistance as well. So those athletes tend to need the highest amounts of protein because they're causing the highest amount of muscle protein breakdown. And that's a good way to think of it. It's not injury, it's just soreness, but it happens. The average Canadian gets about 17%, right? Less than 20% of the calories from protein. It's more than sufficient. There's a lot of funny information out there about these very high protein diets, and you don't need it. 35% is considered safe. More than that isn't, and ultimately, safety is a concern for sure. But also, we have to keep in mind that anybody who eats more calories from protein than they need, those extra calories will end up being converted into fat anyway, because there's nothing else the body can do with them. So you don't need that much. On the high end, 1.2 to 1.7 grams per kilogram per day. So let's move on. And now we're going to talk a little bit about muscle protein synthesis in a little more detail. Muscle protein synthesis, that means building muscle. So athletes want to repair the breakdown of the muscles as they are at training, and often they want to gain muscle to make muscles bigger and stronger. And it is dependent on two stimuli which need to be there. There is no option. The first is exercise, okay? Approximately 24 hours after exercise. And resistance exercise, that means moving the muscles against resistance, whether it's weights or body weight or whatever it is, okay? And it's anyway, myofibrillar proteins, those are the muscle fibers themselves. Whereas endurance exercise builds more mitochondrial protein. The mitochondria, I know Elisa will talk more about mitochondria, but those are the organelles or the structures inside the cell that provide energy. So in any case, that point there more or less just tells you that the building or synthesis of protein is specific to the type of exercise that you do. And finally, right, the second component, which is equally important in order to gain muscle, Elisa, if we can click it, is protein. And these are just the simple guidelines. We can click a few more points here on the screen, right? 20 to 25 grams of protein will elevate or raise the level of muscle protein synthesis for between 2 to 5 hours. Okay, and finally, then we have next point here. Next point here. Yeah. Oh, okay. So, yeah, so we had one more point. Yeah, that's okay. So maybe we can go back to the slide there, Lisa. Sorry about that. Let's go back to the previous slide. Yeah. Okay. There it is. Yeah. Okay. So just to be clear that it's these two stimuli paired together, exercise and protein. The reasons why 20 to 25 grams is optimal. That's something that we'll get into in a little bit more detail. Okay, so this next picture here is an interesting one. Essentially, you can just think of it as the relationship between muscle protein synthesis and muscle protein breakdown. So the green line that you see there, that's protein breakdown. And again, it kind of follows a wave pattern. You can imagine that in the moments when protein breakdown is occurring, that's during a workout, usually, right? A hard workout. And then, in the moments where you're resting or eating protein, then, typically you'll get less protein breakdown. So what's the key message or takeaway here is that synergy, right, between protein breakdown and protein synthesis requires feeding of protein plus resistance exercise. So the two together, right? Training against resistance and eating protein together, that's synergy. So that's basically what this idea means. In the graph on the bottom, what you're getting is you're getting greater synthesis. Okay, why? Because this person down here has been exercising against resistance, and he or she has also been eating enough protein, clearly, because they're getting good gains in muscle size and strength. Okay, all right, so we move on. Some of the data here, and we'll go fast here, but I'll be asking you, what does it mean? Okay, so first of all, we've got these groups of athletes that were measured and given either a placebo, which is the white bar, a mixed amino acid, which is the gray bar, or an essential amino acid, which is the striped bar. Okay, and they did a workout, and then they were given these different supplements. Placebo essentially just means like an artificial sweetener; it has nothing in it. Okay. And what did they find? Well, the groups that had the amino acid supplement, they got a more protein synthesis for sure, and even a little bit less protein breakdown. So PS is protein synthesis, PB is protein breakdown, and finally you have NB. That's nitrogen balance. You can think of it as protein balance. We talked about energy balance before, being energy in versus energy out. Nitrogen balance or protein balance means the balance between synthesis and breakdown. So what's interesting, and we call your attention to the circle here, we can say, Elisa, what does it mean, right? Well, what it means is that without protein in the diet, you're actually at a negative protein balance, and that means you're going to break down your own muscle. You're going to lose muscle. Whereas the other two led to a net positive protein balance, and that means that those groups that had, again, the resistance exercise plus the feeding of amino acids, those groups had muscle protein synthesis. They built muscle. So that's what that means. Now we go on to the next slide. Okay, this is the world famous chocolate milk study. This is the study that got everybody going crazy about chocolate milk. And I want to tell you that chocolate milk has nothing fancy in it at all. It simply has protein and carbohydrate. It has protein in the milk, and it has sugar also in the milk, carbohydrate. So what did they find? They took groups of athletes that performed a hard workout, and then they were fed either chocolate milk, which is protein and carbohydrate together. CHO is just carbohydrate. That's the gray bar. So the chocolate milk is the black bar. Carbohydrate is the gray. And then a placebo was the other group, and that's the white. And they measured the time to complete a time trial. Lower is better because it means it took you less time to complete the time trial. And they also measured the power in watts. In that case, higher is better. And Elisa, what does it mean? Well, you can see very clearly with the bars which are circled that the chocolate milk group, that's the group that got protein and carbohydrate after their workout. They had a lower time to complete the time trial. They were faster on the time trial, and they had a significantly higher power output. They were stronger, and they finished their exercise quicker. So protein and carbohydrate together, that's what it means, that it's good to have them both together. So now we go into the next question on the screen, right? Which is, how much protein do athletes need to consume? Well, again, the science is fairly clear on this. Okay, this is the muscle protein synthesis measured based on how much protein was eaten. And what do we find, Elisa? We find that the sweet spot in terms of how much protein needs to be eaten after a workout is 20 grams of protein. So that seems to be the number. Less than 20, okay, you can look at the 10. Okay, the synthesis was much less, and more than 20. I know it's trending upward, but it's not significantly greater. So even with 30 or 40 grams, so 20 grams. That's the answer to the question. How much protein should athletes consume post-exercise? On average, about 20 grams. Okay, so we move on to the next question. What type is best? And keep in mind, there's lots of different kinds. Many of them work, but more or less, what did this study show, right? What does it mean, Elisa? We can see these are groups of athletes that were given either whey protein, casein protein, or soy protein, okay, first at rest and then during exercise. And what happened? The group that had the whey protein, they had the higher amount of muscle protein synthesis relative to the other two. So what type of protein is best? Well, according to the data, whey protein seems to be the best one. Okay, let's move on. Okay, here's the question. When should athletes consume protein? This is two conditions. P0 means that athletes were given protein at 0 minutes immediately, or 0 hours immediately after a workout. And P2 is the group that were given protein 2 hours after. Okay, what do we find? What does it mean, right? If we can click the next slide. Okay, so what we see there is that the group post-exercise, right, that took protein right away had a higher, again, this is cross-sectional area, so this is the synthesis of muscle. They built muscle, they synthesized muscle protein more than the group that was given the protein 2 hours later. So the answer to when should athletes consume protein is immediately, as soon after exercise as possible. So we go to the next slide. What about long-term gains? And, again, there's a very similar trend here, but we'll put them all on the screen and then we can go through them. Let's put them all up there. And yeah, okay. So what do we see here? First of all, again, a comparison. So we're looking at on the y-axis, the change in muscle fiber. CSA stands for cross-sectional area. Think of that as muscle size. And then we have, the control group. Then a control group was given a placebo. The soy group, they were given soy protein, and the group that was given milk protein. Well, we can see clearly that the group with the milk protein had the greatest change, the greatest increase in muscle cross-sectional area. And here, this is measuring the again the change in body mass, muscle mass. And again, the milk group had the highest change. Keep in mind, this isn't necessarily saying that athletes need to have milk. We've got to look at the protein, okay? And so the protein in milk, it's similar to the whey protein. And if we want to get a little more specific, I know Elisa will talk more about this, but any supplement, okay, that has the amino acid called leucine, right? We'll look at it in a little more detail in a few minutes, but leucine is an essential amino acid, and the quantity of leucine in the milk or the whey protein is very high. And so that seems to be the one amino acid that's really important for building muscle. So we move on. Okay. Summary of protein. So we can just throw them all on the screen. This is the idea, right? You consume it after exercise and ideally immediately after. 20 grams, okay, maybe 10 of essential amino acids, but 20 grams seems to be the sweet spot. You don't need more carbohydrate if protein ingestion is adequate. Liquid tend to be best, so that's why supplements are good. Why? Because they digest rapidly. And again, I know Elisa will speak more about that in a few minutes, but that's the idea. The milk or the whey appears to be the most efficient because it has a high leucine content, and that seems to be the best source to build muscle. Athletes need to have protein throughout the day at regular intervals, 20 to 25 grams of protein per meal, and excessive quantities above 1.7 grams per kilogram per day are not needed. It doesn't even matter, even if you're doing heavy training, heavy lifting, you don't need more than 1.7 grams per day. Okay, so let's move on. Now we have part 3, which is hydration. And, I'm first going to start by just talking about the body and the water content in the body, because we need to know that. This is just an average 70 kilogram person. Okay, we know that 60% of their body mass, or 42 liters, is water, and that's divided into intracellular and extracellular water. Intracellular is within the cells, extracellular is outside of the cells, and then from the outside of the cell, we have water or fluid in the interstitial fluid, and also intravascular, which is within the arteries and veins. Okay, so that's the body water. But then we got to think, is the body really made up of water, or is the body made up of water plus something else? And that's where the salt, the electrolytes come in. So let's put those on the screen now. Okay, so body, water, and salt. So the body also has electrolytes, right? Sodium, chlorine, potassium. Okay, so really, we're not water, our body. Our body is not water. Our body is salt water, and it's a 0.9%, almost a 1% saline solution, because we've got about 0.9 grams of salt per 100 milliliters of fluid. Okay, And just to give you some perspective, a tablespoon of actual salt is 4 grams. So we're about a quarter of that. That's what we have in our body all the time. So water and salt together, keep that in mind. We'll talk about it in more detail. Let's go to the next slide. So what does water do in the body? Well, it maintains the volume of the blood and the osmolarity. It helps to transport oxygen. It's involved in regulation of blood pressure, removal of waste products. It helps with neural conduction so that muscles can function. That's neurons are the connection between the brain and the muscles. It helps to regulate body temperature through sweat. So it has many essential roles in the body. We can move on. It also helps to replenish energy and also helps to maintain homeostasis, the balance of metabolism and functions of enzymes. So it's just very important. And then we can look at the role of electrolytes specifically on the next slide. Oh, and actually water also has a shock absorbing properties. So we move on. Okay, electrolytes in the body, again, the key ones, sodium, potassium, and to a lesser extent, chlorine. They help with nerve impulses. So the ability to contract muscles and also to relax muscles. So all of the sports movements that are needed, you need sodium and potassium for those. The kidneys regulate electrolytes, and there is a recommended daily intake, which we can look at the bottom. The recommended daily intake, if we can click it one more time, right? It's about 1.5 grams per day of sodium and about 3 to 4 grams per day of potassium. That is easy to get from food, but that's just the daily intake. We got to look specifically at athletes. So let's look at the next slide here, okay? So now we're going to start talking about dehydration and why it's so important. Well, we can measure dehydration in terms of percentage body mass loss, and then we can look at the corresponding results. So if an athlete trains or plays a game and he or she loses 2% of their body weight in that game, that's again through sweat, and it can be measured. It can be measured very simply with a digital scale. It's not hard to do. You just have to be diligent about it. If you lose 2% body weight, your heart rate goes up, okay, right away. So you have an increased heart rate during the exercise and at rest and throughout the day. If you lose 3% of your body weight, all of a sudden the performance of muscles starts to decrease. You're less strong, you're less powerful, you cannot recover as well. If you start getting into 4 to 6% body mass loss, now all of a sudden strength gets significantly decreased and you lose hand-eye coordination. Competing in sports starts to become impossible at that level of dehydration. And then we're getting into 8 to 10%. Blood volume goes down. You have a higher respiration rate, nausea, confusion, fainting and heat stroke. So, without scaring people, it can be very, very dangerous if body mass loss goes beyond, 6%. And really, it should never go beyond 2% if you're well hydrated and you do a good job, including supplementation, which we'll talk about. Then you should be able to maintain it. And, just the last little thing here on this slide, Elisa, that we just highlight that, that 3% is a real threshold there, because anything more than that, and you cannot play sports at the same level. Okay, so it's very important to try to minimize it. Okay, so now let's look at the effects of dehydration in a bit more detail, right? You lose fluids through sweating. Dehydration means an increase in body temperature and a decrease in blood volume. So stroke volume, that's the amount of blood pumped by the heart when it contracts, it goes down. Less blood going out per beat of the heart or contraction of the heart means the heart needs to beat faster in order to maintain the same cardiac output. So you lose strength, you lose endurance, you decrease your physical performance overall. We keep going, Elisa, right? So, there's the equation. Okay, what happens with dehydration? So this is the standardized equation for cardiac output. That's the function of the heart, let's call it. Okay, it's stroke volume multiplied by heart rate. So if when you're dehydrated, you get a decrease in stroke volume, the only way to maintain the same cardiac output is to increase the heart rate. And that's why heart rate goes up when you're dehydrated. And you don't want your heart rate going higher than it needs to be during exercise. You want it to go high when you need it to give yourself oxygen and everything, but you don't want it to go higher than it should be. And you can avoid it by not being dehydrated. So we go to the next slide and we see, okay, the effect of dehydration on heart rate. It's very clear, right, Elisa? What does it mean? The next little thing. it means that the athletes that are dehydrated, the top group, they had a significantly higher heart rate throughout the workout. And this was a controlled study where they did not allow the athletes to lose more than 2% body weight because that wouldn't even be safe. But they had a significantly higher heart rate. Okay, next question on the next slide is how does dehydration affect core temperature? It's the same. Okay, 1% to 2% body loss, you get a significant increase in core temperature. You can't play sports at the same level if your heart rate is higher than it should be, and if your temperature is higher than it should be. So this is already not safe. Move on. And we say, how does it affect actual fuel utilization? So this is the measurements of muscle glycogen or energy. What does it mean? The group that was dehydrated on the left as compared to the hydrated group on the right, they had used a higher amount of muscle glycogen, a significantly higher amount of muscle glycogen than the other group, and it was more pronounced when they looked at the total. So you have a higher heart rate when you're dehydrated, you have a higher core temperature, and you use more energy, more glycogen than you normally would if you were well hydrated. So all of these are not good. And finally, we can go to the last question here. How does it affect performance? And again, we can throw them all up here, right? This is the same study with multiple measurements. I want to call your attention to the top two. First of all, the one on the left, that the dehydrated took longer to complete a time trial than the hydrated group. The circles are higher than the triangles. And here we have power output, okay? Higher is better, and the hydrated group had a higher power output throughout a 2-hour workout as compared to a dehydrated group. So all this is to say there's a lot of evidence to show that being dehydrated is really not good for any athlete. So we want to avoid it at all costs. And finally, now we can look at, my sport, right? The best sport on the next slide there, right? Which is talking about specifically sodium lost in sweat during soccer. And the question, what does it mean, right? Call your attention to the last group here. This was a very interesting study where they measured the actual sodium that was lost by groups of soccer players playing a 90-minute game in the heat. What does it mean? It means they're losing an average of 5 grams of sodium. Okay, and the quick math here, 5 grams, that's 5,000 milligrams of sodium. That's how much an athlete at the high level can lose in a soccer game. Okay, and keep that in mind when Elisa talks about the supplement level. When you replenish sodium, right, with a supplement, right, an electrolyte supplement during training, you're not getting all the 5 grams back, but you're attenuating the decrease in sodium, just like you try to attenuate the decrease in energy or blood glucose with a carbohydrate supplement, and you do that in order to delay fatigue and delay all of the negative effects of dehydration. So that's the idea. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, so we summarize hydration. Water is good, but not optimal, okay? Just imagine, this guy, this is Trezeguet, by the way. He's French, so he's not the best. The Italians are the best, but he's still very good, okay? Imagine the bottle that he's holding. Imagine that's just a body, right? And the body, let's imagine that it has a little sprinkle of salt in it. So now that it's got water and it's got a little bit of salt, so it's got a certain concentration of sodium or salt. Now, if you start to pour out of the bottle, you're going to pour water and salt out. And then, think of that as exercise. So you lose water, right? And you lose sodium as well. You lose body weight. And then you put back water, but you don't put back any sodium. What happens to the concentration of the sodium in that case? Well, the only answer possibly is that the concentration of sodium goes down. And if the concentration of sodium and to a lesser extent potassium, if that goes down too low, it becomes unsafe. You get the same, effects from dehydration that we talked about. So water is good, but water alone can dilute the concentration of sodium in the body, and that can lead to very negative effects. So sports drink or supplement has benefits. It gives fluid, right, Elisa? Number 2, it gives carbohydrate to maintain blood glucose and give back some glycogen or attenuate the decrease in glycogen. And 3, it gives electrolytes, which replaces what is lost through sweat, retains fluid, and attenuates the drop in sodium. And finally, they're flavored, and again, we'll talk about some of these delicious watermelon and other flavors, which make people want to drink them more than just water. So we've talked about carbohydrate before, during, and after. We've talked about protein before and after, because you don't need it during. And we've talked about water, before, during, and after. We're going to give some general guidelines now in the next few slides before I hand it over to Elisa. So first of all, and by the way, we're going to announce later, but we're going to do another presentation that gets into meal planning in a bit more detail. But often, athletes, parents will come to me and ask me, exactly how much should I eat and what constitutes a serving and all that. So you can get into servings based on size or number of grams or whatever, but I like to keep it a little bit more simple, just because I think it's easy to understand. Think of a plate, cut it into quarters, and a serving is a quarter of a plate. So that's the idea, in terms of how, if we're talking about you need 1 serving of protein per meal or 3 servings of carbohydrate or whatever, it's a quarter of a plate. 1 serving is a quarter of a plate. Now, I would ask the question simply, which is the nutrient that's dominant on this plate? Well, pasta is a form of carbohydrate. Vegetables on the left are a form of carbohydrate, and fruits are also a form of carbohydrate. So which nutrient is dominant? Carbohydrate. Why? Because athletes, as you know, need carbohydrate in order to perform high intensity exercise. They need it to get the glycogen that they need. Protein is on the plate. It's on every meal. But it's only 1 serving or 1/4 of a plate. And just keep in mind, this is not to scale. Of course, 4 eggs and a salmon and a steak and all that, that's way more than 1 serving. That's probably about 6 servings. But the idea is just the picture of the nutrients, so we're clear. Carbohydrates dominate the plate, and proteins are a small portion. Okay, so we move on. Summary guidelines. And again, this is like a little teaser for our next presentation. But this is the idea. Young growing athletes need food on the high end of Canada's food guide. Okay, 3 to 4 meals per day. I'm just going to say 4 meals: breakfast, lunch, dinner 1, and dinner 2. And the way to understand that is, breakfast is in the morning, lunch is in the middle of the day, dinner 1 is after school, and dinner 2 is after training. Sometimes dinner 1 or dinner 2 might be a snack. Sometimes if training is very early, dinner 1 is a snack because you got to train at 5 o'clock or something. Dinner 2 is a bigger meal. If training is late, maybe training is at 8 o'clock, dinner 1 is a meal, dinner 2 is a snack. But this is the idea for meals, right? 1 serving is a quarter of a plate. You have 3 to 4 of grain or carbohydrates, 2 to 3 of fruits and vegetables per meal, 1 meat or alternative, and 1 milk. We move on. Some specific recommendations before training: high in grains, carbohydrates, right? If it's a meal, that means you have 2 hours or more to finish eating. Okay, you go 4 grain products, 2 fruits or vegetables, avoid meat or alternatives and milk products. And a sample meal is a plate of pasta with mushrooms and spinach. And that is not the only way to do it. There are hundreds of ways to do it. That's just one example. Okay, to have 2 hours before a training or game. If it's a snack, again, maybe it's dinner 1, training is earlier, you don't have time. Or, it's late and you just have to have a snack before bed. You don't have time to cook. You finish eating 30 to 60 minutes, so more or less immediately. 1 to 2 grains, 1 fruit. Avoid meat and alternatives, only because, again, we're talking before the exercise. And, a sample would be toast with jam and with a banana. Okay, that's the pre-training game, or whether it's a meal or snack. During, okay, we said replenish carbohydrates, maintain blood glucose, replenish electrolytes that are lost through sweat. Halftime is a great time to do it, or if there's natural breaks or water breaks, whatever. Okay, during training, simple way to do it with food: 1 serving of fruit. So remember, soccer players, when your mom and dad gave you the oranges, that wasn't just for fun. Obviously, they were very well aware of the need to attenuate the drop in blood glucose, and that's why they did it. Okay, a handful of a salty snack. I'm not saying a bag of peanuts or pretzels or whatever, but 1 or 2 pretzels you could do. Peanuts, something with some sodium in it, if you wanted to do it with food. Again, a sample snack, a banana and an orange, or half an orange, a bottle of sports drink or a supplement. This is why they're used, right? The fluid supplements, liquid protein drinks, and things like that. The reason they're used is that they're easy, they're convenient. That's what supplements are. They're meant to supplement the diet, and a sports drink with carbohydrate and electrolyte can do that. And finally, we look at after. The next slide there, right? After. Oh, so post-training or game, okay. Combination of carbohydrate, meat, and milk products. Why? Because you need carbohydrate and protein. Remember the chocolate milk study. If it's a meal, 30 to 60 minutes post-exercise, again, immediately is better. 3 to 4 grains, 2 vegetables, 1 meat, 1 milk. Carbohydrate is still the dominant nutrient on the plate. This is an example. A plate of rice with chicken, carrots, and green beans, right? So you have your protein and your chicken. You have the rice, complex whole grain carbohydrates. You have the carrots and the green beans as more starchy carbohydrates. There are also vegetables, of course, which have vitamins and minerals in them, and a glass of milk. If it's a snack, this is the example of the late training. You finish at 8, you finish at 9, don't have time to cook, you got to be in bed relatively soon. You eat 30 minutes after, right away. Okay, 1 grain or 1 fruit, and 1 meat or alternative, or 1 milk product. An example is an apple and a cup of yogurt. That's not hard to do. That's not expensive. You can bring it with you in your bag if you want to, and eat it in the car or on the way home. Okay, so we move on. The last little summary before I pass to Elisa here. We're going to talk about water, and just like with food, where we talked about a quarter of a plate, we're going to talk about water serving sizes with a unit of measurement that everyone knows, which is these small bottles that are 500 milliliters. Okay, so we look at the next slide and we see lots of those bottles popping up onto the screen. 1, 2, 3. That's the idea. What are the guidelines in general? We move on. The general guidelines. Okay, let's put them all up there. 3 to 4 liters or 6 to 8 small bottles per day. Okay, you want water throughout the day, not just at a specific time. There is no ideal time. You don't just drink it in the morning, you drink it all the time. Okay, training and games, you switch to a sports drink during training and games. Why? Because you're sweating. You're sweating and you're losing electrolytes, and they need to be replenished. Okay, and that's the reason why that should be done. And then we've got some specific guidelines on the last slide here before I hand it over to Elisa. Okay, which is before training, this is a good strategy. 500 milliliters in the 30 minutes prior to the training and game. You should feel like you have to go pee during the warm-up. Coaches, okay, your athletes should tell you that they have to go pee at some point during the warm-up. Okay, that's how you know that you've done it right. During training, right, once you start, because now you're sweating, now you're going for 500 milliliter of a sports drink or a supplement with equivalent amount of sodium, potassium, and perhaps also carbohydrate. Okay, and after you finish the bottle of sports drink, you switch back to the water. Okay, and finally at the end, another 500 milliliters of water. So even there, you've got your 1 liter, which is 30% of what you need for the day. Okay, so again, we said questions at the end. I will say, of course, thank you so much for listening to me, and I'll pass it on to Elisa now.
Wow, thank you, Richard. Gosh, there was just so much incredible information that you just shared with us, and you're so humble in how you present yourself, but really, you are absolutely such an incredible mentor for these athletes and the greatest scientist I would say I know on this topic. So thank you for sharing everything. And we're going to now kind of move into the sports nutrition / therapeutics and nutritional supplement side of things. And I'm excited to be here. I actually work very closely with Richard at Speed Training. And my role is to provide nutritional consulting and support. My name is Elisa Gracci, and let's get started. So with that being said, some of you may be familiar with our product partner brand, USANA Health Sciences. Maybe you're asking and wondering why. Well, we are the official health supplement supplier to more athletes and professional associations than any supplement supplier in the world. I think that speaks huge volume, and for many reasons. And we're going to talk a little bit about that, especially for those of you who are looking to, grow and advance your athletic journey into a professional career. There's some things that you really want to know as a young athlete or an adult athlete, as a way to make sure when you're investing in your health and making choices, you know what to look for. Is my volume okay, Richard? Just want to double check. Okay,
Perfect.
awesome. Thank you. Now, something that's very, very unique about USANA Health Sciences, and I know this spoke to Richard as well, was that they offer a guarantee that is unmatched internationally. And of course, this guarantee is put in writing. And that is, if ever an athlete were to be tested and something was linked back to one of our products, not only would that, let's say, tennis player or basketball player or soccer player be compensated $1 million, but every single athlete on that team and organization would be compensated. And that's a huge guarantee to put in writing. And like I said, that is unmatched internationally. And year after year, what's really exciting is to see just this roster of our athletic portfolio just growing and growing and growing. And actually, we have an ongoing joke that if we were a country during the Olympics, we would come into first place because our athletes bring home the medals, which is really, really amazing. And I believe after listening and experiencing it and connecting with a lot of these athletes, there's a direct correlation, right? When we fuel our body properly. So before we get into some of these specific nutritional supplements and, that are going to support you on the sports nutrition side of things, I think it's important. Like I said, we want to empower you. So just a few things to share. And because of the fact that there's so much out there, and I know it can be quite overwhelming, but not all nutritionals are created equal. And there's a few key things we want you to look into. And before I share those few unique things, I do want you to know that again, with Richard's background, he's very scientific and very evidence-based. I think what aligned with him and I was the fact that USANA is founded by a pioneer in the world of health sciences, Dr. Myron Wentz, who has a double PhD in microbiology and immunology. And it's really amazing to see that this is how this brand and this company came to birth, really from a place where Dr. Wentz shifted his research from diagnostics, medical diagnostic technologies, and human cell culture into what the role of nutrition is at the cellular level. And something he saw and realized was a massive need in today's world was that, unfortunately, most of what's out there falls very short when it comes to what our cells need in regards to absorption, proper formulation, and of course, the cutting edge and advanced science that we offer. So with that being said, just a little glimpse into the industry for those of you who are, learning about this and you're exploring the power of, cell nutrition and how to maybe add some additional elements to your nutritional protocols or programs. You might be curious, what are the standards? How are natural products regulated? And unfortunately, in North America, US and Canada, of course, there is a little bit of a difference, but what we do see is that unfortunately, there's quite a lot of room for tolerance, and that's the word they use. So when I say tolerance, think of that as, wiggle room in the sense of if I look at a label on a product, whether that's a protein shake or my magnesium, whatever that may be, there could be quite amounts of variance in the labeling. So if it says so many milligrams, or if the ingredients list is listed a certain way, again, there isn't a 100% guarantee as to what's on the labels in the bottle, and that could vary. So similar to when you buy crackers and cookies, each cookie and each cracker might be a little different. So that nutritional label, again, may not be exactly as accurate as we would like for it to be. So because, again, supplements aren't considered drugs, of course, and for that reason, they're not put through similar testing or what we call, strict safety and effectiveness requirements that, let's say, drugs would be put through. This is where you want to make sure before you choose your supplement brand or utilize these products, you ask these important questions to make sure they make the cut. All right. So the GMPs, or for, here in Canada, we work with Health Canada, specifically, and we want to know that when natural products are being manufactured, which regulations are they following? Which codes and guidelines are they following? If they're only meeting, food grade or natural product requirements, often this is where it becomes an issue. And what I love so much about USANA Health Sciences is that they've actually gone above and beyond. And it's, so many years back, I have to double check the exact date, but it's been as long as I can remember that they've gone above and beyond in the sense that voluntarily decided to obtain a drug establishment registration. So what does that mean? Just for your peace of mind, know that not only does USANA do all their manufacturing in-house, meaning they don't outsource this process, it's not done somewhere overseas in some random warehouse. This is done right in their own facility, and that facility is regulated and registered to the same standards required for drug production. Okay, so it's night and day. And for myself as a board certified nutritionist, and I'm sure for Richard as his background as a scientist, we want to look at a label and look at a formula and know that it's accurate, that there is no tolerance, no variance, and that exactly what's on that label and the formula that it says it's to be is 100% right down to the T. So we know we're going to get results and consistency with what we're utilizing for our athletes and in general, right? So very, very important. And it says a lot in the sense of their integrity and in the quality and in the standards that they're providing. Again, for me, this is so rare and it's unmatched in most scenarios. All right. So there are also ways you can look up, third-party testing and referencing. And often you'll hear Richard and I and others share, USANA is the best. Well, hey, everyone says they're the best, right? Why are we number one? Well, we feel really confident in that based on our research, but we also know based on the third party, this is also coming back every single time based on the testing and the references. There's a reason why they've been put into this category in the number one spot for global leaders in health sciences. All right. We're also in the compendium. The PDR is the US version, but basically this is the book that pharmacists and doctors often reference to if they're looking up, medications you may be taking for contraindications and all of the above. But this is, again, quite rare and quite unique because it's seldom you'll find a nutritional product in the compendium. So again, because of the way we're regulated and our standards, and of course, this is something that if you're feeling you want to go back based on your own health history and health requirements, you can let your family doctor know or your medical doctor know that we are in the CPS, which is always, it's a huge win in their books. All right. So with that being said, I want to start off with a little bit on macronutrition. Richard, he really emphasized the importance of supporting our bodies, fueling our bodies, especially as athletes. Athletes' requirements are much more unique. The demand is higher, of course. So macronutrition is where we're talking about, your carbs, your proteins, your fats, and something that's become very, very popular and very effective for our athletes is our NutriMeal. We have something that is designed specifically to support you. As we know, food is fuel, and we want to make sure that you're getting the right amount of high quality protein. Something I love about our active line, as Richard mentioned earlier, that sweet spot he talked about when it comes to your protein consumption is at that 20-gram mark. And hey, guess what? Our NutriMeal Active provides exactly that, 20 grams of really high quality, non-GMO protein. And we do have options here, meaning if you, our main one is a whey protein. Again, the science shows the benefit of a whey protein because of the leucine. However, we do offer a vegetarian option or plant-based option if that is something that you would require based on your dietary preferences or restrictions or needs. All right. Now, everything is gluten-free, preservative-free as well. And as I said, non-GMO. So, it's important that we get protein in, but we also want quality protein. So when we're talking about food sources, it would be amazing if we could source out, high quality, organic, maybe wild. These are going to be better options if you have access, and of course, if it works with your lifestyle. All right. So another thing I love about the NutriMeal and the NutriMeal Active is it does provide some good fats, some fiber, and the carbohydrates that we so require, right? Pre and post. Now, here's another huge tip. Richard was mentioning that post the workout, the best time to optimize that protein intake is immediately after. All right, not like an hour later, but right after, not even half an hour later based on the chart, right? And if I say that, if I hope I'm saying that correctly, Richard, but based on the diagram, based on the science, that's what we saw. So
exactly, yes.
okay, great, thank you. And often what happens is, and Richard knows as a coach, these soccer players or athletes after the game, whether they have to go back to the change room, change gear, jump on the bus, or figure out whether they're getting a ride, however you're getting back home, there could be quite a time gap from the game to, providing that optimal fuel or nutrition back into the body. So one of the huge wins I often hear from our athletic team or group is that they love the convenience of this. It's something that they can make right there on the go, rip open the small pouches, add it to a blender bottle, which on the go, they blend really easy. All you need is water. And that'll help you restore, of course, the protein that's required, but also the glycogen levels that have been totally depleted, right? So huge win. Another big win here is if you are traveling and you're on the go and you're in maybe foreign countries, this could be really beneficial in the sense that you don't want to maybe try something new after a game or before a game, especially if you don't know how your stomach's going to tolerate it. All right. So I know, especially the Olympians that I speak to when they're traveling, all over the world, they're always like, Elisa, I'm so grateful I have my NutriMeal. It is such an easy go-to, and it's a lifesaver sometimes for them. All right. So and last thing, it is low glycemic, so it will help sustain energy because it's going to also support your blood sugar levels. All right. So lots of wins with the active NutriMeal, and you're going to maybe use the signature NutriMeal as a meal replacement as well. As Richard said, there's days where you don't have enough time to maybe eat a full meal. Taking it in liquid form is going to be a lot easier on your digestive system. And again, you don't want to be running around or putting too much in your stomach prior to a game that's requiring that much strenuous activity, because it just, it won't go well. We know that. All right. So moving on, we're going to stay on the macronutrition tip here. And we're going to talk a little bit about maybe some protein snacks or protein bars. We also have these awesome active nutrition collagen protein bars, which have so many benefits, for the young and for the adults at phases of our lives. But they're packed, right? So you're getting, 15 grams of protein, which is pretty awesome. And they're very convenient and very clean. Okay. So again, you could throw these in your gym bag or right into your back pocket or backpack, whatever's easier for you. And it's going to allow you to get a little bit more of that protein source and a little bit more carbs into your diet if you're finding that you're on the go and you don't have a lot of time to prepare something. So the peanut butter bars, I know that sometimes that's not an option because of the peanuts in there, but we do have the decadent vanilla. And if there's any coconut fans out there, you are going to love the Coconut Craze protein bars. All right. Now, if you have any questions, again, we're going to go through it at the end, but just know that this is, again, support. These are tools that can optimize and help you with getting in that extra bit of protein, extra bit of carbohydrates, and as well, post-workout, also some extra good fats and fiber. All right. So with that being said, I do want to really emphasize some of the key ingredients, because I apologize, I should have had the slide actually right after they got mixed up, but I do want to emphasize some of the key ingredients. So with the traditional whey protein, you're also going to be getting, as you see here, like we said, 20 grams of protein, 8 or more grams of fiber. This is going to also help support your digestive system. It's 10 grams of low glycemic sugar, so it's going to help you sustain energy, but it'll give you a good amount of fuel. And also about 24 to 27 grams of carbohydrates, right? Good fats, there's also a blend in there. But like I said, this liquid, it's a liquid formula, so it's not going to cause the same type of disruption or stress on your digestive system. All right. We also have the active free option, which the protein sources come from brown rice, chickpea, and pea. You'll see here that all you really need is 3 scoops and about 10 to 12 ounces of water. Give it a shake. It blends beautifully. And we do have them in these awesome small single individual sized pouches, which are just great for traveling purposes. They're just super convenient. All right. So with that, we're going to now move over into the hydration space. There was a huge, I think the importance and the emphasis on this, Richard, you did such an amazing job at that. I was actually blown away because I remember studying this, but I almost, until you refreshed my mind, but the impact on your muscle performance, I mean, that is critical. If you want that cutting edge as an athlete, you really have to make sure that your body is getting the right amount of hydration, the right amount of electrolytes, and of course, nutrition. It's really what's going to give you that cutting edge, right? So what we offer here is our watermelon electrolyte replacement drink. I love this so much. And kind of like those single pouch protein, protein pouches, the electrolytes also come in these small single measured little sticks, which makes it very convenient. You don't have to worry about traveling with a big Gatorade or Powerade and all of that. But aside from that, I think what's so awesome is that you're also getting really clean, a sports drink in a sense, because often you'll find there's lots of additives, dyes, all kinds of stuff that you don't want in your drinks. All right. So here are key ingredients: the calcium, the sodium, the potassium. Interesting, I think, Richard, you highlighted that 300 milligram sort of mark around the sodium intake, which is perfect. This is exactly what you're getting. And it's very refreshing. It's very thirst quenching. But again, we're going to replenish those lost electrolytes. We don't want to just replenish with water, right? It's really important. We're also going to maintain hydration levels even that much better, support healthy muscles, all that electrical conduction. And of course, it's going to give you that clarity, mental clarity, and energy. And that's really important if you are out there on the field. Okay. So definitely you want to get your hands on this and make sure to start incorporating it in your sports performance portfolio. All right. So now we also have something that's very unique. I love this as a way to, quote unquote, Richard and I always laugh, legally. Okay, we're not breaking any rules here, right, Richard? I think he could give us a thumbs up maybe, because I definitely.
Yes, it's way caffeine is only banned in about a dose about 10 times this, and everything else is 100% legal. So we're all
Okay,
good.
good.
We're all good. Yeah.
I love that comes from Richard, because if there's someone who would know, it would definitely be him, being a coach on so many levels. And I think parents will come to us and they'll always ask, well, can my kids have this? Or even as adult athletes, you want to be very careful not to break the rules in any way, but also you might be looking at, well, how can I enhance my performance and get the benefits of some of these nutrients and some of these, unique herbs and different antioxidants that are going to give you, again, that cutting edge, right? So let's talk about our Rev Surge sticks. Love, love, love these. I love to spin and run and, get moving. And I definitely find that when I take my Surge pack prior, so this is pre-game, pre-performance, this is really going to fuel you and catapult you in such a clean way. So you could see here that the caffeine is derived from natural sources, 3 different types of teas. It also, as Richard said, it's not a very high dose. It's only 80 milligrams, but in one of our previous workshops, we shared the science, and actually this was the sweet spot. This was the sweet spot for caffeine intake. It was at that 80 milligram mark, which is awesome because it just kind of correlates back to how our product line and our formulas are very evidence and science-based. All right. Also, it contains Korean ginseng and rhodiola rosea, which are going to help improve the body's response to stress and fatigue. Actually, rhodiola rosea, it's incredible with how it impacts the cortisol levels in our body, and it helps reduce those levels, right? That stress hormone that we often talk about. And again, very clean. So similar to as I mentioned earlier with the electrolyte drink, we are also going to honor that with our let's say game slash pre-fitness enhancement drink. No artificial flavors or sweeteners or colors and all that. Very clean. All right. You're also in this unique formula. We've included an energy complex, as we refer to it, with the malic and citric acid. These ingredients, what happens is they're broken down and they enter into the Krebs cycle, right? So this really, what we're doing is we're supporting that transport chain. And I don't want to get too scientific, but when we're thinking of your body's energy stores and how we're going to refuel the body's energy stores, this is what makes the energy complex so incredible. Right. So often when people start to feel that little bit of exhaustion midway through, you're going to actually be like, you're going to be able to double time on how much energy you have when typically you're starting to feel that burnout or that exhaustion. So it's very, very effective and very, very clean. Huge win with the surge packs. All right, so now I do want to just do a quick touch on micronutrition. It's so critical. It's crazy because typically we'll focus on macros, but the role of micronutrition is so essential, and every single body system requires, the right essential vitamins and minerals to provide, the optimal level of, performance and functionality and all of the above. So I'm going to start with our teenage formula. It's called the Body Rocks. And again, this is formulated specifically for teens. And there are different things happening, right? So teenagers have a different demand and a different requirements than, a child, anybody under that age group. And you'll see that it's very comprehensive. Not only are we going to provide all the essential vitamins and core minerals that you'd require, but we're also making sure to provide advanced levels of antioxidants. When we talk about oxidation or oxidative stress, when you're an athlete and you're, pushing your body to a whole nother level, that demand is high. And as Richard mentioned earlier, when you think of oxidation, it's like a burning effect, right? So your cells are working hard. You think about that mitochondria, as we mentioned, the mitochondria, which are the engines in your cell, they're working really hard to create energy. And as a byproduct, it also creates waste. And that waste, contributes to that oxidative stress. And what we want to do is, help buffer that inflammation and help address all of that oxidative stress to advanced levels of antioxidant support. And that's how we're going to do this. And when we do this, you're going to notice that, again, in conjunction with the right macros, with the right nutrition through your food, this is going to take you to a whole new level. All right. There's also some vitamin D in here, which is awesome. And it also, as a result of utilizing the calcium, because the formula is very synergistic, it's got all the right cofactors to support the absorption of all of these essential vitamins and core minerals. All right. Lastly, it's tasty, although it is designed for swallowing. It's not a chewable. You're going to take one with each meal, preferably obviously with food, but that's typically how this formula is designed to be consumed. It is ideally for teenagers, anywhere from 13 to 18, or I would say 17. Once you hit 18, you're ready for the adult formula. Now we do have a children's formula. This is called our USANA. This is a chewable formula. So for some of you who you are maybe not ready to swallow a tablet, you can start here. The range, again, very comprehensive. It provides excellent nutritional support, all of your essential vitamins, minerals, but the antioxidant load is a little different and the dosing is different. So if you think about the teenage formula, this would be half of that. So if you are a little older and you can't swallow tablets, you're going to have to take a higher dosage to kind of, meet the demand or the requirements of your body. So this is typically designed for children, 2 to 12, and very tasty. Again, it has like a fruity flavor. There are no artificial ingredients, dyes, colors, very clean. When I speak to pediatricians that I've worked with over the years, they've always said to me, not only do we love what's in the USANA, we love what's not in them. Again, so really important that we get quality, proper formulas that are science-based and balanced for optimal absorption. All right, now moving on. If you are, heading into that 18 or above, or you're just a tall, very well built, young athlete that, even at 17, your demands are a little more, you might want to consider our adult formula. And then for the adult athletes, just know that we have, of course, formulas for the adults that are providing the foundation, the essential nutrition. We start with the cell essentials. We also have the ability, which is very unique, to customize nutrition. So based on your needs, on your lifestyle, on your diet, on your predispositions, all of that, your priorities, we can provide you with a complimentary consultation. Of course, that's something that Richard has incredibly, brought in to provide added value as a service. And I'm so just grateful that he does this, because it just shows how committed he is to his athletes and to his facility, because he wants to make sure that you're getting such an integrative and holistic approach to your results. So for those of you who are curious about our customization, please let me know, because I will provide a consultation to create something like that. And it's very convenient, because the pillow pouches that you can see here are designed to be formulated and balanced. And again, you don't have to worry about when to take it and the dosing. It's all done for you in little AM and PM pouches. Really awesome. All right. Now, we've also designed specific nutrition programs for sports nutrition based on age category. So we have our youth performance and our teen performance, and of course our 18 and up, which is our adult performance. And in these programs, we've selected what would be ideal or best for athletes. However, they're not fixed. So we can modify these. They are very much designed. We are always looking at how to make sure it's customized and personalized for you. We all, of course, do have different needs, but these key micronutrients, antioxidants, minerals, good fats, whatever it may be that are in these programs have shown to be ideal for athletes in their age categories. And we also have programs that are specific to recovery and a tournament ready pack. Okay, so getting you really ready when you're out there performing, competing, and in your tournament mode. All right. With Richard's permission, maybe I could play a quick clip from one of the managers from a soccer club. I know it's not the best team, Richard, because it's not the Italian club. But
Let's do it.
it's
Let's
gonna
do
be
it. It's okay.
okay.
England,
Okay,
England is
awesome.
good.
Quick play.
We train really hard, and side by side, you need the nutrition that goes with it. I mean, we could train as hard as we want, but if we don't have the nutrients coming back into our body, we're just going to break down. You can imagine in our job, we're presented with a lot of different products to try and experiment with. And instantly with USANA, I liked the way the messages were very clear. You knew when you were taking the products that they weren't going to be contaminated. It was going to be absolutely clean. What you eat, what you put into your body affects how you feel. It affects your mood. It affects everything about you from the minute you wake up to the minute you go to sleep. So if you know the players are getting good nutrition, they're going to have lots of energy and be able to run, which in football is everything.
If we can get an edge playing in the Premier League, then why wouldn't we? We want to be able to compete in there physically and make sure that we stay in there.
Awesome. All right. So with that being said, I would love to just let you know that we, again, offer complimentary health consultations. You can actually go right onto Speed Training's website, and they have a link available on their site where you can click on it and book yourself right in. All right. So hopefully this was informative and helpful. Know that we're here to support you as a team. And actually, we're really excited because it seems that there's been quite a bit of questions and demand around meal planning for the elite athlete. Again, athletes have a whole nother level of requirements. So we're going to break this down. Join us. This is going to be live, and following the live, we will offer it virtually, but join us at the Speed Training facility Thursday, June 8th at 7 p.m. I'm going to give the mic back to Richard a minute and open up for a quick Q&A with his permission, of course. Is that good? Okay.
All good.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. I learned so much again tonight. It was incredible. I always feel just so grateful to have a mentor like you and a friend like you and a colleague like you, Richard. And I'm sure everyone's feeling the same way. So let's
Thank you.
let's open up for a quick Q&A.
Sure. Feeling is mutual, and I know you know, all you watching now, you've been around for a while now. But of course, if you have any questions, please let me know. Type them in the chat or the Q&A.